Foreign Office Minister Hamish Faulkner joins me now. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning, Minister. Trump's latest Truth Social post is a humiliation, isn't it? Accusing us of trying to join wars we've already won and saying that they won't need UK aircraft carriers.
Well, look, I think as the Prime Minister has set out this week, we did take a different decision from the United States in relation to the initial strikes on Iran. That's clearly a disagreement between our two countries that is part of a much wider, deeper relationship. So yes, I think there's no escaping the fact that there is a disagreement, but I don't think it's a humiliation to disagree even with close allies.
Is it not a humiliation for the US President to call a UK Prime Minister, not Churchill, a loser and weak?
Look, there's obviously a disagreement. I found in this job it's best not to focus on social media posts, but to focus on substance. I mean, there is an important relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, which continues. But on this question, there obviously is a disagreement.
But it is worrying for him to say, but we will remember. He seems to be suggesting that Starmer has jeopardised that special relationship.
Well, I see the special relationship in operation all of the time. I mean, you see it in operation at the moment. We're working very closely with the United States in order to ensure that our friends, our partners, our people are protected across the region. American planes are flying from British bases at the moment. The special relationship continues to be important for both sides, and I'm sure it will continue to be so well into the future.
Wasn't it also humiliating for the Prime Minister to be speaking at a Downing Street press conference on Thursday, saying that we had pre-planned for this and that we were prepared only as HMS Dragon was still in Portsmouth Harbour undergoing repairs? Haven't recent events exposed how ill-prepared we actually are for military action?
Well, in relation to Cyprus, we had pre-positioned a considerable amount of capability into RAF Akrotiri that had been going on since January. It included hundreds of armed forces personnel, radar, anti-air defence missiles, F-35s. But look, the Iranian attacks have been particularly reckless. They've targeted more than 10 countries. It's right that CDS and defence ministers have reflected on that and taken further decisions subsequently.
But you can understand why the GB News audience looks at the last few days and thinks it has made Britain look weaker on the world stage. We have a Prime Minister accused of dithering and delay, heavily criticised by Donald Trump, with whom he was once thought to be close. And we have a situation where we still have our only available warship in dock in Portsmouth, undergoing repairs and still not able to sail.
Well, Camilla, I think it's really important to separate the two decisions that we took. It wasn't dithering and delay. There were two different decisions. One was, should we join the initial strikes in Iran? And I'm sure your listeners have a range of views about whether or not that was a good idea or a bad idea. But I was in those discussions with the Prime Minister. He took those decisions on the basis of what's in Britain's national interest. That's the decision that ultimately flows to a British Prime Minister. It's not for any ally, no matter how close, to decide what's in our interests. It's for us to do so. And that's what we did in relation to the first decision.
Although it had been reported. Oh, sorry,
in relation to the second decision, sorry, Camilla, we have capability which is really, really important, including very important air bases. We took a decision in order to provide options for the American Air Force to be able to degrade the ballistic missile launchers in southern Iran more rapidly than they otherwise could. That was because they were threatening our friends, our partners, and our allies in the region. Now, we were already doing plenty on that, so I wouldn't want your viewers to come away with a misapprehension that the only air defence we have is HMS Dragon. That's simply not true. We've been shooting down drones. We've been using very advanced technology to ensure, for example, munitions headed towards potentially UK bases have been disrupted even from the ground. There's plenty that the UK has been doing. I'm the MP for Lincoln, which has a very strong RAF presence. I know that RAF personnel right across the region are working night and day to keep our people safe.
I think there's a sense that there was some prevarication last weekend because we now have leaks from that National Security Council meeting that the Prime Minister was of one mind and then was persuaded by the likes of Ed Miliband and indeed the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper out of his initial thinking. That therefore begs the question, well, who is running the government? Is it the Prime Minister? Is it actually Ed Miliband? Is it even perhaps Attorney General Lord Hermer?
So the National Security Council is an absolutely vital forum for senior ministers to be able to discuss the most important questions facing the UK and not have those conversations enter into the public domain. So I'm really not going to get drawn on the details. I was in those discussions. I know how seriously they were weighed, and I wouldn't describe it as prevarication. There were two distinct decisions, Camilla, and I just set out why I think the Prime Minister was right on both of them.
The Prime Minister seems to want to move towards some kind of negotiated settlement, go back to the negotiating table with what's left of the Iranian regime. Historically, it hasn't proved easy to negotiate with Ayatollahs, has it?
No, it hasn't. Before I was an MP, I was a negotiator for the Foreign Office and negotiated with really difficult groups like the Taliban. Nobody pretends that negotiations are easy, but the most effective way of ensuring that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon is if Iranians themselves stop their pursuit of one. So diplomacy with Iran is always going to be an important part of trying to make sure that they don't get nuclear weapons. That's not to say that we're starry-eyed about the prospects of diplomacy. I cannot tell you from my own career how often diplomacy is frustrating, gets nowhere, leaves you feeling like you aren't making progress. But it is nonetheless a vital tool. We are taking hard measures too. We're disrupting Iranian plots. We have extensive cooperation with our friends and allies to make sure that their proxies, their violent operatives are not able to harm our interests. But diplomacy is an important part of that too.
On diplomacy, we still have a situation where, as far as I can understand it, the Iranian ambassador to the UK is still in the country, correct? Not been expelled? You've spoken to him this week. So are we keeping him in place because he's our key line of negotiation? Because some watching and listening to this might think to themselves, well, why is the Ayatollah's office still open in London? Why is the ambassador for this murderous and tyrannical regime still able to operate in the UK?
So, Camilla, I've summoned the Iranian ambassador twice this year. What does summons mean? That's a diplomatic term for the strongest possible expression, short of expulsion, of frustration, disappointment and anger with another country. I summoned him first this year over the absolutely murderous behaviour of the regime in relation to protesters. And I summoned him again in relation to the reckless attacks on the region and our interests. I think it is important, even with countries with which we have profound disagreements, that you have a channel to deliver important messages, like the dangers of escalation, the very significant steps we would take if British nationals in Iran, including those in Iranian detention, are harmed. It is right that we have that channel with Iran. I think it's right that we have that channel with Moscow too. Having diplomatic channels does not imply weakness or an agreement with those regimes. It's important that we have an ability to communicate directly in the way that I did this week with the Iranian ambassador.
The Ayatollah's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, appears to now be being lined up to be his successor. We now learn this morning from the Sunday newspapers that he has two properties in London, two very expensive multi-million-pound flats overlooking the Israeli embassy. How concerned are you about that? And what do we know about Mojtaba Khamenei?
Well, Britain now has as extensive a range of sanctions against the Iranian regime as we have ever had. I think it's more than 550 sanctions. They are on the top tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, which is enabling us to more easily track their influence. So to any institution or individual associated with the Iranian regime thinking that the UK will be an easy place to try and launder the money of the regime, I would say we have got an effective record. We have an effective regime of sanctions. And where they are found to be in breach, then the police and the security services take the action that you'd expect.
And yet we still haven't prescribed the IRGC in this country.
Well, we did a review of the prescription regime. So I used to work in counterterrorism, and there is a difference between terrorist organizations, which is what prescription tools are used for, and the institutions of the state. One of the reasons why the IRGC is so dangerous is not because it's a terrorist organization like Daesh, but because it's part of the Iranian state. and that gives it different advantages. So we did a review by a guy called Jonathan Hall, who's the reviewer of terrorism legislation. He said, you need a prescription-like tool, but it needs to be focused on the particular threats of states, and we're going to introduce that new measure in legislation in the coming session.
It's a bit too little too late, though, isn't it?
Honestly, Camilla, the sanctions are in place. There have been more than 20 attempts by Iranian entities to cause harm on our soil. Our security forces have been able to disrupt every single one of them. I know how much concern there has been about the IRGC, but I want to reassure your viewers that there's absolutely no sign of Britain being a soft touch on any of these questions.
Foreign Office Minister Hamish Faulkner, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning on GB News.
Thank you very much.